And 7 says never simply reject an offer, always counteroffer. When I have a buyer, when I have a real buyer who wants to buy a house from me, and I analyze them and I talk to them and I'm convinced that they really want to buy this house, I don't want to let them get away. I really want to keep these people. Buyers can be kind of rare in some markets. So when somebody likes your house, you want to sell them that house. And now the question is, how can we sell it to them? If we can't do it with a traditional manner, maybe we can do it with a lease option. Maybe we can sell with owner financing. But I don't sell houses that I own personally as long-term investments on owner financing, because I don't like paying taxes. I'm with Mitt Romney, no taxes. Or was that George Bush that said no new taxes? All these guys have slogans, right? And when buying, make a list of what's most important to you and negotiate for it last. So when you're selling a house, is the down payment more important than the price? Which is more important to you, the down payment or the price?
Down payment.
Well, you should think through that, then write it down. Let's say somebody's willing to pay you $150,000 with $10,000 down, or $160,000 with $5,000 down. Which would you take? What about $180,000 with $5,000 down? Which would you take? I'm trying to make it easy for you. The price often depends on how long the terms are of the deal. But if it's like a lease option, a 1-year deal or a 2-year deal, the price is pretty important, isn't it? On a lease option, if somebody will pay me $169,000 with $5,000 down, or $159,000 with $10,000 down, I'm going to go for the $169,000. That's $10,000 more I make, because the down payment applies toward the price, doesn't it? Okay? That's not extra money, it applies toward the price. So it's just principal now or principal later. So think through things like this. Things like this are important for you to think through on a rainy day. Sit down with your yellow pad and go through deals, make up deals, and make sure they're doing. We're on page 30, negotiating through agents. Most of the deals I buy, I won't say most, but about half of them go through agents. So I'm negotiating with brokers on a regular basis. They bring me deals. And, I would miss a lot of good deals if I wasn't dealing with agents on a regular basis. I used to be an agent, so I really understand the business. And I'm happy to pay commissions. I don't mind paying a 7% commission as long as the deal is right for me. So an agent's major motivation is collecting a commission, right? They're not doing it because they like you, but what they need you in certain markets more than others. If you're a buyer and it's a buyer's market and there's not many buyers out there, agents need you and they'll come to you. So if you have access to cash or access to financing or know how to put together an owner financing deal, a creative deal that most people don't know how to put together, you're an agent's best friend. And agents typically end up with a cash commission, but if I buy something on terms or sell something on terms, they're happy to take a partial commission now and partial later, kind of go with me. So you can negotiate, everything's negotiable. Are commissions negotiable?
Yes.
Most big brokers tell you commissions are negotiable? No. Judd, I have a friend, actually Judd's related to him, and he said he had 2 commissions in his office. This guy was the best broker in our town, and he said it was 6% or 0. He said, nobody's gotten 0 yet. Everybody else paid 6%. But he had the biggest office in town for years and collected a lot of commissions. But commissions are negotiable, aren't they? And if it's the right deal, if it's a property that's easy to sell, if it's a one-of-a-kind property, you can negotiate your commission down far below 6%. So know that. Things are negotiable. Yes.
When you approach agents you don't know and start talking about owner finance, do they look at you like you have 2 heads?
Well, I don't approach agents I don't know. They approach me. Okay, and that's a difference, isn't there? Because if they approach me, that puts us in the right position to start with. And now I'm probably going to help them learn a little bit about owner financing and ask them why they haven't been able to sell this house, what they think the problem is, what's wrong, why is the market tough, and get them to tell me some of the reasons that this house hasn't sold and why it won't sell. And then we'll bring them along a little bit. You make agents offers. I remember this one fellow came to me and he said, now you told me if I had somebody who needed to sell in a hurry, that you make them an offer. And I said, okay. So he explained the whole deal. The lady still lived in the house. Okay? She wasn't behind in her payment. She owned it free and clear. She wanted to move. And I said, I'm not sure she's interested in selling it. He said, oh yeah, she really wants to sell. And I said, why? She said, well, she wants to move back and be with her two sisters up in Indiana, and this is a lady who's up in age a little bit, and she really wants to get there by Thanksgiving. This is November something. It wasn't Thanksgiving yet. And I said, well, you know, that's a reason I buy, you know, because people have personal reasons they want to do things, and that's good, because it wasn't a money issue with her. She just wanted to move. So I said, you know, I think we can solve that problem. So I made him an offer. And I made him an offer with about a 10% down payment, which is enough to pay the commission in cash. Now, is that important to the broker? Yeah, that's a kind of a highlight for them. And I said, and we'll close it in 1 week. So she'll have plenty of time to get packed, move, be up there by Thanksgiving. And I said, here's the terms. And the terms were going to be 100 payments of $700 a month, no interest. He said, well, I've never seen anything with no interest before. And that's true, right? I mean, most brokers have never seen an offer that has no interest in it. Most of them say, well, you know, you got to charge interest. And I said, well, you don't have to charge interest, okay? But this is my offer, and let's go through it one more time to make sure you understand it. I'm making a down payment, okay? There's enough to pay a full commission, and we'll close next week. He got that part. And he said, the rest of it's not that bad either. So he went and presented the offer. And it turned out this lady had bought this house for a fraction of what she was selling it for, because she lived there for 35 years. So the house, you know, you find somebody who's lived in the house 30, 40 years, the house probably went up, right? So she, you know, she bought it for a low price. Now it's a higher price. And I was giving her price. I wasn't arguing price much with her. But what was I looking for? Relatively low down payment, and then great terms. Better terms than I could ever get with a bank. Terms that would give me cash flow, yet pay the house off in less than 10 years. And she said, I need to get a bigger down payment if we're going to do this. So she asked for a bigger down payment. Instead of 10% down, she wanted 15% down. And she shortened the term from 120 months down to 90-some months. But it was still, she didn't change the no interest part. Well, the no interest part was the part I really liked. And especially because it has some time associated with it. You know, if it's just no interest for 1 year, that doesn't help you much, right? But if it's no interest for 7 or 8 or 9 years, that helps you a lot. That helps you a lot because that whole loan's going to get paid off in that period of time. And I was buying this in an entity that I wanted a free and clear house in a short period of time and had plenty of cash, so it worked out. She took it to an attorney, and we have another section with attorneys here. So her attorney is now looking at it, and the attorney calls me up and says, you signed an unconscionable contract with my client. I said, what makes it unconscionable? He said, there's no interest. I said, well, she kind of liked it, I thought, but you know, if you don't like it, you know, I don't want to go to court. If this is unconscionable, and that's a good word for attorneys to use, meaning, you know, you kind of broke your mental law, I guess. But anyway, I said, you know, I'm with you. I said, you know, if you want out of this deal, if she wants out of this deal, I'll tear up my contract, you tear up your contract, no hard feelings. That's not what he wanted. He wanted me to agree to pay 7% interest, see, some interest rate. So he called his client back and said, well, I talked to him, he won't pay any interest, so we're going to get you out of this deal. And she said, I've called the movers. I'm moving next week. If he doesn't buy the house, you are. And she was meaner than he was. And he was very afraid. So he called me back up and said, we've reconsidered, and we think we'll take that deal. And I closed on that deal, still own that house. It's a good house. Just rented it this week. Nice people. So, you know, it's funny how people will look at different issues like that, but a broker's main issue is getting paid. They don't want to, they have to be able to explain to whoever they represent the deal, so they need to understand the deal. So you need to take enough time with them, go over it 2 or 3 times so they get it, but then you can see the benefits. And the benefits to the seller were very plain. She was getting paid a lot more for the house than she paid for it. The down payment made her feel safe. He knew me. He could vouch for me, saying if John signs a note and says he's going to pay you, he'll pay you. You know, there's no risk involved here. It was a good deal for everybody. Number 2 says if the agent refuses to present an offer, get a new agent. Switch agents or go directly to the seller. You know, the agent works for who? The seller. What relationship does the buyer have with the agent? None, really, none. So you can go knock on the door and say, look, I've been trying to get this agent to present an offer to you. He refuses to present it. I don't know what's going on, but I'd like to talk to you about buying your house. And what kind of reaction do you think you'll get? They'll probably want to talk to you because if they're not very happy that agents aren't presenting offers. The dumbest thing in the world an agent can do is not present an offer. You have to present offers. You never know what kind of reaction you're going to get on the other side. And agents have this habit of thinking for the sellers, and they say, well, I don't think they'd take that, so they don't present the offer. Well, that's not smart, because you don't know what the people will take. I mean, they may have won the lottery this morning. You don't have any idea what's going on in that seller's life. Present the offer, present it and say, this is a terrible offer. I feel bad about presenting it, but present it and see if you can't get them to come back with some kind of counter offer, or maybe some way you can make it better, but just try to do some business, never tear an offer up. That's silly. There's a wide range in agents' negotiating skills. I mean, I was an agent, I was a broker, had 13 salesmen at one time. Some of these people are just clueless, aren't they? So finding somebody who can really negotiate for you, who's a good agent, who's sharp, who's a good negotiator, that's a real talent. And you should keep track of those people and have them work for you, because there are some people who are killer negotiators who put together a lot of deals. And if you study how much money agents make, do you think the top 10% make a whole bunch more than the rest of them? They do. The top 10% are very well paid, do very well. The bottom 90%, not that good. Choose a tough agent to represent you, so one that has skills. One who's negotiated a lot, one that knows how to keep the ball moving, how to get a deal closed. Hope for a nice agent to represent the other side. It's hard to set that up, but it works nice sometimes. Protect yourself from agents who will steal your deal by insisting that you will be present when they present the offer. I told you a story about that earlier already, but I give people very short fuses when I make offers through agents. I'm not going to give them 2 or 3 days to think about it. It's going to be very short, unless it's a strange deal like a big commercial deal or something. When selling, get their attention with a fat commission. I sold at my dad's house last year. And everybody else in this area, this was out of town, was listing at 6%, so I listed it with a 7% commission. Now, you wouldn't think that 1% would be that big a deal, but it was. It got shown more than anything else because everybody was after that 1%. I mean, 1% is 1%, and we sold it right away. So if a normal commission, 1%, if you think of the sales price, and if they can get you close to a full price offer and you pay an extra 1 point on a commission and they sell it fast, isn't that a good deal? I think it is. A fast closing and as-is closing will often trump a high offer. So when I make offers, my offers through agents typically are close next week, which really gets their attention because that's payday, and I'll take the house in as-is condition, no contingencies. Well, that kind of offer, no lending contingency, and that's you don't make that offer unless you know the real estate, but no contingency at all. That's an offer that really sings to a seller, isn't it? Okay? And it does the banks. We bought a number of bank-owned properties with that kind of offer, because most of the banks' offers are contingent on financing, contingent on inspection, subject to a bunch of stuff, and it takes a long time to get them closed. So if you can close quickly, and you can close because you know the property, you can close without risk, you can get a lot better price than your competition. When possible, sell your own property and net more. That's the lease option I talked about in the last section. And negotiate beyond the end of the listing period. I mentioned that earlier. So if you're in a negotiation, just keep on going. Don't worry about the listing running out. Negotiating with lenders on the next page. There's 2 major classes. Yes, ma'am. Sir.
Where would you find the listing period? How would you know when the end would be coming?
I just ask the agent. Okay. Now, they don't always tell you, but you can kind of, sometimes, it's funny, different systems, MLS is all on a computer now, so different systems have different amount of information. Sometimes you can see it. But I just ask. Taking the old-fashioned approach, just asking people for things, a lot of times they just tell you. And when people say, how do you find who owns a house? I said, I ask the next door neighbor. They almost always know where people across the street. I can look it up pretty fast too. But a lot of times people will know people, and communities aren't that big, and you can run somebody down a lot faster than you can trying to do it a more sophisticated way, I guess. So lenders come in 2 basic categories in my mind. One is institutional, all your banks, all your Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, all that stuff, and the other is private lenders. Private lenders are individual that makes loans, plus it's all the pension plan money. Is there a lot of pension plan money? $14 trillion. That's a lot of pension plan money. And a lot of it gets placed in real estate mortgages. Now, the difference between these 2 organizations, both of them are kind of regulated by the government, but the banks are regulated much more highly by the government. They have a lot more rules they have to play with. They can't do as much stuff. They're not as flexible. The pension plan money on the other side, a lot of it's private money, is negotiable, and their main interest on the pension plan side is preserving their capital. Because if you have a retirement plan, you want your capital intact so you can take it back out someday. The bank's main interest is staying in business and keeping their jobs. Okay? So they're not excited about preserving capital as they are turning money over. They'll sell stuff cheap. They'll do things that the pension plans won't do. But the pension plans, and I am one, so I understand pension plan law really well, the pension plans will make you deals because they don't need the money in right away. Most of the time they can wait another 5 or 10 or 15 years for their money. So if they can see that they can get their capital back, plus maybe even a small amount of interest, 3, 4, 5%, they'll make you a deal over here. So as you're negotiating with lenders, first of all, make that distinction. Institutional, private. I would much rather work on a private deal because there's so much more flexibility. Sort of like buying a house from a seller. You know, they own the house. If they own it free and clear, there's a lot of things we can do. So I have all sorts of creative things I can do with the private people. Institutional people, not so creative, not so flexible. Hard time negotiating terms I like. Hard time getting that zero interest loan. So it's harder over on this side of the fence. Lenders can renegotiate anything on existing loans. I mean, they can forgive the existing loan if they want to. They're not prone to do that, but they can go any place between here and forgive the loan, so they can extend the length of the loan. Anybody besides me had letters come from lenders here in the last year or so where they're renegotiating your loans, dropping your rates, extending the term? This is unusual, but we're getting those letters right now, and those are letters approaching, lenders approaching us to rewrite loans that are current loans, not loans in trouble. So they can change the length, the amount of the payments, the interest rate, the collateral, the guarantees, due on sale clause, late fees, back payments, principal balance. So with a short sale, with what we used to call a cram down, which is a voluntary reduction in principal, but banks can do all these things, and so can the private lenders. But the private lenders can do so much more, because in tough times, why do times get tough in the real estate business? What makes times tough? Lack of credit. Lack of credit. We still have the same number of people, right? We didn't have a plague or anything. People didn't disappear. They still like to live inside. So the reason the real estate market has tanked is that the credit markets have changed dramatically. Well, as they change back, the real estate market will change again. Okay? The private lenders in bad times still have money. Money didn't disappear. Money just moved around. But the private lenders, the pension plans, the individuals, you think rich people get richer or poorer during a recession? Bunch of Democrats in the room. Rich people get poor too. You got to get this right if you're going to go out in public. Now, do some rich people get richer? Yes. Sure, because they buy stuff cheap, right? Warren Buffett will probably do just fine. If you've got oodles of cash, you hope for a recession, don't you? Because during a recession, you go buy stuff cheap if you have access to cash. Well, private lenders have access to cash. Pension plans are all cash. They're not leveraged, so there's tons of cash over there. And if you find people that have pension plans or institutions like the teacher's pension plan, they're just awash in cash. Did their net worth come down? Do you think pension plans lost some value? Sure they did, because the assets they owned came down. Some of their loans went bad. I got a guy here in town that had a whole bunch of mortgages in his pension plan. They all went bad. He was greedy. He was doing nothing but second mortgages. What happens to a second mortgage when you have a little real estate downturn? Gets wiped out. So that was it was a really good plan when he was making 14% on his money. Bad plan when they all got wiped out. Okay, so now he has to go to plan C. Plan B didn't work. Before you make offers on the next page, study the condition of the lender. We pick on banks sometimes because we know they're in trouble. And if a bank's in trouble, what do they need? Cash. They need to get rid of bad loans, get to cash. So they will discount existing loans that they have for cash. They will sell property that they have on their books cheap. So local knowledge is important. And these are typically smaller local banks, and local banks go broke during recession. So tune into that. And If you're talking to a bank employee, question them about their authority to renegotiate or reduce a loan. And if they don't have the authority, you need to talk to the person who has authority. Okay, so work your way up the ladder. Don't be shy about asking that question. They will tell you. Time is on your side when negotiating with a lender. You know, we worked on deals more than a year, several times to get them closed with a lender. We've got one deal right now we've been working on for 2 years. We're no place close to closing it. But you know, what happens to the value of a property over 2 years? Well, it should go up if it's well maintained. But what happens to a lot of bank-owned property? It sits empty for 2 or 3 years, and what happens to its value? It can drop, can it? Because if you don't maintain the house, if you don't run the AC, you don't run the plumbing, that house is going to need an awful lot of work. And some of them get bulldozed, don't they? Some of them just get scraped after 3 or 4 years. So you may have a house that loses all its value. You can just buy it just for the lot. When buying from a lender, if a property needs a lot of work, lenders will wholesale them. Because what can't you get on a property that needs a lot of work? You can't get a loan. You can't get a loan. So the banks that made mistakes and loaned money to flippers and people who are doing rehabs and contractors who got half a house built and quit, well, half a house is really hard to borrow money on, right? And I mean, a half may have a roof on it, but no kitchen, you know, no bathrooms, nothing on the inside. So look for those houses. They're tremendous opportunities. You can buy them real cheap, but you need to know what you're doing. Always have your bank-owned properties inspected. Bankers like and respect documentation. They like this authority part. So if you come to them with an inspection with a list of things that need to be done, typically you can negotiate the price and get a reduction for all those things. You can't insult a lender with a low offer. See? Try to insult a banker. See if you can do it. It's not their house. They may have a deadline. Ask questions like, can we close in 2 months, and see how they respond. Bankers sometimes are working toward the end of a quarter or the end of a month. You know, they have some kind of performance deadlines, and the boss has told them, get rid of this thing by the end of the month or the end of the quarter or the end of the year, whatever it is. So be sensitive to those dates, and sometimes that helps you establish what their deadline is, and you make a little bit better deal right before the deadline. And again, closing quickly and in as-is condition sometimes buys you a terrific price. Some of our best deals have been fast closing as-is conditions. Negotiating with tenants on the next page. I've already said don't rent to tenants who can out-negotiate you. The key to negotiating with tenants is having written policies, having documentation to support those policies, paperwork that you can hand them, explain your procedures to them, and then hand them a document that supports that. Say, here's our rental contract, here's what it requires you to do. You know, if you can't agree to this, that's okay, but you can't rent our house unless you agree to it. You can't rent our house unless you follow these rules. And we make them initial each page, sign the last page, so they understand every rule on those 6 pages. And we're serious about this, and we go over it with them. You know, I spend maybe a half hour going over, even if you have a child on your lap, it still takes a half hour to go over those 6 pages, because I don't skip over stuff. I make sure they understand them. And by doing that, we've done some screening already, but by going through the rule list before they move in, we have very few problems after they move in. Okay? And tenants comment all the time. They'd say things like, you know, our last landlord just handed us a lease and told us to sign it. Okay? And kind of the implication was they didn't know what was in it, and neither did we. You know, they just signed a piece of paper. Well, if you do that, nobody pays attention to the piece of paper. It has no authority. But if you go through it line by line, explain it to them, explain the rules, and they understand what you want them to do, and we want tenants to do a couple things. We want them to pay on time, take care of their property, fix things that break, and never call. Not a lot of requirements, just a couple things. But if they'll do those 3 things for me, life is good, isn't it? Life is good. People ask me, how many hours a week do I work? And I said, a week? You know, it's about 4 a month, you know, and that's a busy month, 4 hours a month, because there's months that go by and nothing happens. You know, in my life, things can be really good. If I'm full, and I'm full right now, all my houses are rented, good tenants, there's a really good chance that I won't do anything next month. Drive Valerie crazy, but you know, she's looking for things for me to do. But you know, from a landlord standpoint, if nobody calls and they all pay the rent on time, what do? Okay? You know, you don't mess with things. That's what you do. You just don't. Things are working. Leave it alone. So, but if you're a full-time investor, what does that give you time to do? go out and get in trouble. Go out and buy something else, right? Go out and stir things up. Yes, sir.
What is the most effective way that you have in collecting your rents? Is it direct deposit or mailing to you or?
People, 90% of our tenants probably mail the rent checks in. Okay, we take rent checks, we don't take, and nobody pays cash. We do have some people that are going to direct deposit, and I think if you come back in 5 years, everybody will be direct deposit. I mean, that's the trend. All the younger people are doing direct deposit, so as we turn our tenants over, most of the new ones want to go direct deposit. But we don't, you use the wrong word, we don't collect the rent. I don't go see them. They pay the rent, and they pay the rent on or before the 1st. We were in the Virgin Islands last month on the 1st, and when I got back, I had 2 phone messages from tenants. They said, "You didn't cash our check. We paid you. We sent our check in. Nobody cashed it. Is everything okay?" You don't hear that much from tenants, you know. And we call them back, say everything's okay. We were just out of town. Put the money in the bank on the 3rd or the 4th. You know, weren't here on the 1st. But you know, when we came back, everybody paid. Well, that's a pretty good system if everybody pays and you're out of town, right? You're not here, you're not out there beating up on them, not out collecting the rent. And I used to, years ago, understand, I used to own a bunch of apartment buildings, and then I was collecting rent. I was going door to door, knocking on doors, collecting rent because nobody mailed it in. You had to chase them down for it. But it's a different type of tenant that I have now. The people value their houses. They don't want to move out. I give them a good deal on the rent. I take care of the house. They take care of the inside. We keep it decent on the outside. And you know, it's a win-win deal. That they value that house. They don't want to move. So can I raise the rents? Sure, I can raise the rents because they don't want to move, and they know what it costs them to move, and it's not $25 a month or anything. It's probably $1,000 or more to move. Yeah.
John, are you able in this marketplace for security deposit about a month and a half still?
Month and a half exactly. Month and a half exactly, and that's probably it is increasing. We're up $200 from what we were charging a year ago. Okay, and it's going up, and that's important. And I can't give you the whole landlording class here, but if you're new at this and want to learn landlording, take my course and study it. You'll want to listen to that more than one time. You really want to get trained up on how to select and interview tenants, and then how to handle the trouble calls you get. I mean, because they will call occasionally, and you have to learn how to negotiate with them, and we're going to cover some of that here. Every contact with a tenant is an opportunity to negotiate. The first phone call asking about the amount of rent and deposit. Will they try to work on you? They will. And I've got, I had one family that must have called me. I had one house for rent about a month ago. I rented it, but I had about 8 calls from all these people related somehow, and they're all asking me, they were working me, you know. They were asking me different questions, trying to get the rent down. Well, would you take a little smaller deposit? Well, would you take half the rent now? No. I have firm rules on this. If you don't have enough money to move in, you're probably not going to have any money next month. Right? And the next month you won't have any money either. You're going to be poor the whole time you live in my house. Well, I don't rent to poor people. You know, I've been involved in nonprofit housing. I build houses for poor people, but I don't rent to them. It just doesn't work out. So if you can't afford the full deposit in the first month's rent, I don't want you as a tenant. Now, you can adjust that if the Great Depression hits, okay? Because I like staying full when we have major recessions. I don't like being empty. But the good news is, if you have good tenants before the big recession hits, most of them will stay with you. 80% of our tenants stayed right there, didn't move, nice and solid, and that gives you a pretty good operating income to survive. So the application, we make them fill out an application, and I can't go through too much detail on this, but you want to, again, you want them to go through some trouble, right? You want to invest some time in this. And to fill out my application probably takes 15 minutes. It's 2 pages, ask a whole bunch of questions. If they won't fill that out, I'm not going to spend any time with them. I want them to fill that out because it's a qualifying thing, plus I get a bunch of information on them. The interview after that, I send them out to look at the house. I don't go with them. We get all sorts of identification before we do that, and I don't worry about people stealing anything out of my house. If they're going to steal stuff, are they going to give me identification? No, if you're going to steal stuff, you're just going to go out and break in a house and steal something. And the only thing they can steal is something the last tenant left behind. Everything else is glued down pretty good, so there's really not much to steal. Yes,
Do you increase the rent every year?
I try to increase the rent every year. The question is, do we increase the rent every year? My rule of thumb is 5% a year increase. And I get that from tracking our rent for the last 40 years and looking what they've done. And in an average year, they go up 5%. Some years aren't average. We don't get average every year. If people are leaving town and the economy is really slow and I've got a bunch of vacancies, I stop raising my rent. Okay, but when they're all full, now I can start raising my rent. We're going to talk about this in just a second, but part of it is this concept of scarcity, right? if there's not many houses empty in town, it's a good time to raise the rent because people go out and look for another house and they can't find one and they're hard to find. So they'll stay in that kind of environment. If I'm full, absolutely full, it's a good time for me to raise the rent because I'm in good shape, right? Now, if I have 5 empty houses, I'm not raising the rent. I've got to rent those 5 empty houses first. And I had 5 empty houses 4 weeks ago. I've rented 5 houses in the last 4 weeks. Yes, sir.
Is your 5% increase keep up with taxes now that the boom is over?
Well, again, it's an average increase. So you look at your taxes and insurance and your real costs, and you're trying to stay ahead of that. You're trying to stay ahead of that because you're raising rent on a much bigger basis than the taxes and insurance are. I mean, if they go up 10%, you raise your rent 5%, you're still way ahead. Okay, so the 5% will keep you ahead of that. So other things we're going to negotiate, the term of the agreement, the date of rent starts. And the date of rent starts is important to me because it's real money. When I rent a house to somebody the 15th of September, I'm going to start the rent on the 16th of September, not the 1st of October. Everybody wants to do it the 1st of October. I said, no, you're going to need time to move in, clean a little bit, measure rooms, make sure all your stuff will fit. You want to get the keys right now, so we'll start it today. If I can't win that negotiation, what does it cost me? What's 15 days at $1,200 a month? $600. That's a pretty nice dinner someplace, isn't it? $600. I mean, I've taken vacations for less than $600, so that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So, you don't want to let that slide by, and it's easy to let it slide by, isn't it? Because somebody's renting your house for $1,200 a month, you give them 15 days free, that's not much. It is much. It's $600. You want to fight for that and see if you can't get that $600 back. It'll pay for this course. The question is, I collect a full month's rent, and then we prorate the next month. So if they paid on the 15th of the month for a month, they paid through the 15th of October, and now 15th of October, they owe me for a half a month. So I get a full month's rent plus a security deposit.
Then you get back on a month.
And then we keep everything due on the first just because it's simpler.
Do you do discount rent?
Yeah, absolutely. I invented discount rent, so the answer is, you bet. You bet.
What does that mean, discount rent? What's he?
Well, yeah, there's a whole class on that, but I'll give you the quick answer because I don't want to duck your answer. But I give people a $100 a month discount for paying on time and for taking care of the first $100 in maintenance. So if they call me, it costs them $100. So I say, call anytime you want, but it costs you $100 every time you call. So I don't mind that they call. In fact, I like answering the phone. I want to make sure I got their address and their phone number and a place to send a letter say you owe me $100. It was funny. I had a our operation has changed over the years because the number of properties we own is about a third of what it used to be. And one time I had a full-time handyman, full-time bookkeeper, full-time secretary, so I had 3 full-time staff. And the tenants would always try to get a hold of my secretary, not me, because they could probably talk the secretary out of that $100 if they were real quick and didn't talk long and they were smooth, But if they got me, it was $100, okay? So now I'm the only guy there. It's more fun because now when the phone rings, I like answering my own phone. And I think a mistake people make is they try to duck, customers. They try not to answer the phone. Well, the tenants are my customers, aren't they? Tenants are my customers. If there's bad news, I want to hear it. If we're doing something wrong, I want to hear it, and because I want to fix something that's broken. But on the other hand, if they call and they want something fixed, we'll get it fixed right away. I mean, I've got guys who will show up the same day probably and fix something, or at least the next day. We'll get it fixed as fast as we can, but you get to pay the first $100, and I'll pay the rest. Okay, so if I can fix it for $60, I made $40 that day, and sometimes I can. And they learn from that process that maybe it's better for them to call the guy with the $60 problem than for me to call the guy with the $60 problem because they still get to pay the $100. So I think we've covered a lot of this. The contract itself, I've talked to you about pretty extensively. You want to have a contract that's long enough, that has the rules in it that you want to enforce. Late payments to move out. When people move out, it's important that you charge them rent for every day they have possession of the property. Because a lot of times the rent will end the 30th of September, and they move out like the 8th of October, and they're still painting and cleaning. We'll charge them for that 8 days. I mean, they're still in possession of the house for that 8 days. You have a lot of leverage because you have their security deposit. And this is not being mean, this is just being fair. You want to be fair. Hopefully, you've got another tenant that'll move in pretty fast behind them in a good market. Returning deposits, we return them as fast as we can, which is generally within 2 weeks. And we send them copies of the receipts for any money we spent putting their house back in shape. And that heads off discussions about security deposits. And evictions, we don't evict. We evict so rarely that I don't even know how to evict anymore. But if a tenant has a problem, I'm going to go to them and try to work it out. Okay? If they've been a good tenant for 4 or 5 years, and now they've lost a job, got divorced, things happen, if there's a way to salvage them, if I can see the light where I think they can get back on their feet and start paying rent on a regular basis and be a current tenant, I'll work with them for a month or two. That doesn't mean free rent. That means I'll let them pay by the week maybe for a month or two, or do some work for me if I can, something like that to help them out. Now, if somebody's only been with me 3 months and they get in trouble, well, that's a whole different conversation. I'm real nervous about somebody who's a brand new tenant. But if somebody's been paying rent for 4 or 5 or 6 years, that's a good tenant. I know these people pretty well. They've done the right thing so far, so I'm going to work with them because I think if I'm good to them, what might happen? They'll remember that. They'll be good to me. They might stay another 4 or 5 years. My average tenant stays 5 or 6 years, and that's creeping up now because of the economy. But if you can keep people in your units 5 or 6 years, you make a lot of money because you don't have any vacancy for 5 or 6 years. Your maintenance cost goes way down. So if you're a new landlord, your focus should be to buy properties that will attract tenants that will stay for a while. Not 1 year, not 2 years, 4 or 5 or 6 years, longer term people. That's where the big money is. Influence on page 34. Humans respond predictably to certain situations. Do you think that's true? You think so? I think so. It's program, it's culture, a lot of things figure into this, and I'm no psychologist, so I can't explain it all to you. But if I give you a gift, do you feel some obligation to reciprocate? A couple people go, no way. Some tough characters in the room. But a lot of people do, don't they? A lot of people do. If I'm nice to you, do you feel the obligation to kind of reciprocate and be nice to me? I think so. If things are scarce, if there's only one cookie left on the plate, do you start thinking about that? There's just one cookie left. Should I take it or not? Yeah. Does it make it? Yeah. First guy back gets it, right. But does it make it seem more valuable than it really is? It's just a cookie, right? But this whole concept of when things are scarce, like the last cookie or the last house for rent in a neighborhood, people put a value on it that's higher than it's really worth. Okay? That's higher than it's really worth. Now you need to understand this concept because if you see one house for sale in this neighborhood and you've been trying to buy in that neighborhood and this is the only house for sale and it's the only one there, you're going to want it more than you should. Okay? Because you wanted the house in there and it kind of works on you. So it makes you likely to pay too much for that house. Now it even gets worse if there's competition. What if there's just one house left in the neighborhood and you want to buy it and you pull up in front of it and then your competition shows up at the same time? Well, now you're competing with them, right? So now you're going to outbid each other. Well, you can see how all this kind of works on you mentally, and these are real world situations that happen all the time. In a market where brokers tend to list things on the low side a lot of the times to just stir up some activity, it's not unusual to have 2 or 3 people show up right away, right? And when you get 2 or 3 people showing up right away, you emotionally say, man, I better get my offer in quick here, or somebody else is going to get this from me, and I got to beat these guys. And all that works against you. All that works against you. So it's important that you understand that these are real-world influences that influence you and everybody else, because when you find yourself being influenced by them, you want to be careful that you're not making an emotional decision to pay too much, more than something's worth, just because of these factors. Okay? So starting off, we talk about beware of strangers bearing gifts. We all like to do business with nice people. We started off by saying that, and you want to be a nice person. You want to be the type of person people want to do business with. That's step one. But sometimes people are a little too nice, like a prospective tenant who's a little too complimentary about your house. You ever had somebody come to you and tell you nice things about your house? Prospective tenant, they really like your house. How does that make you feel? Good. Makes you feel good, right? And now they tell you what great jobs they have, how nice their kids are, and you start wanting these tenants. Okay? And that emotion sometimes will cause you to do what? Drop the security deposit a couple $100 maybe? Drop the rent $25 or $50? You give away a chunk of money if you're not careful because you're saying, hey, we really want these people in the house. If they move in this house, they'll stay a long time. They'll take really good care of it, and that'll save me a lot of money. And you're rationalizing, aren't you? Because you don't know how long they'll stay. They may stay 3 months and move out. You have no idea how they're going to take care of this house. They're playing you. And they may not be playing you on purpose, but most people who are working you have some intention in mind, right? They are trying to get you, they want something back. They're going to ask you for something because they're so nice. So just kind of, when somebody likes your house too much, that's a sign, isn't it? That's a sign. A seller who might invite you into their house. They're having open houses and they give you cookies and Cokes and stuff for free. Well, realtors do this all the time, right? And this is just a little gesture. But when somebody who's not a realtor, you're out, and we find this all the time. Joe and I were talking. Joe came to the class back in 81, and your group bought a house in that class. But I don't know if you had this experience, but when you're knocking on doors, did anybody invite you in?
We had to ask them, can we come in?
Yeah, you asked them to come in. Has anybody ever been in class and somebody invited you in and bought you a drink or bought you a Coke or something? It's weird, but people will do that. And why are they doing that? They want you to like them, okay? And they feel that if they give you a gift, even a minor gift, like a Coke or a cup of coffee or something, that you will feel some obligation to reciprocate and be nice back to them. Well, being nice back to them in a real estate deal can cost you a lot of money. So you want to make sure you don't give away thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars a month just because you like these people. A lender who said it will be no problem getting a loan, but then right before the loan closing, and you're all invested and they've been real nice the whole time, the deal falls apart, interest rates go up, and your points go up and everything else. Well, that happens all the time, doesn't it? It happens all the time when you borrow money from a lender. A buyer who loves your house signs a contract to buy, but then begins to find issues with your house. You ever had that happen? You get everything signed up, everybody's happy, and now they start stealing from you one slice at a time. A little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here. Pretty soon it's $5,000 or $10,000, that they talk you out of. Well, that may not be an accident. They may be doing this intentionally, okay? So look out for that type of negotiation. By giving away something early in the negotiation, the other party may seem generous to you, okay? And again, when they give away something in negotiation, when they let you have your way in the negotiation, that's sort of like giving you a cup of coffee, right? Sort of like giving you the gift, and now you might feel the obligation to reciprocate. Page 35, authority. We're taught to respect authority, aren't we? We kind of admire authority figures. We figure it's a sign of wisdom. People know a lot. We kind of follow authority, sometimes blindly. So if somebody points to the paper and says, sign here, you tend to sign, don't you? Especially if it's a nicely dressed person in a lawyer's office and they say, sign here, you need to sign right here. You tend to sign your name there without even reading the document sometimes. Well, it's funny how we will do that. You can use this for you, of course. We've talked about using a rental contract. We've talked about using your own contracts. We've talked about using your own notes and mortgages when you buy. All of these things, once you get them printed up, you have a printed document, people tend to go along with them. They tend not to challenge that type of document. So think about this as you're buying and using closings. So the way a person dresses, you've seen people, anybody ever meet a con man? A real con man who was really good at what they were doing? How do they dress?
Really sharp.
Really good looking, aren't they?
Black.
We had a guy here in town who conned banks out of tens and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. He had a big black Mercedes limo, and his staff was in a big black Mercedes limo behind him, and they traveled around town in two big black Mercedes limos, and they built banks out of tens of millions of dollars in this town. And they didn't have any money at all. They were just con men. They were buying stuff, selling to themselves, doing all sorts of wild stuff. But people, they looked good, right? And the bankers loved them. All had Rolexes. All had nice clothes, $5,000 suits, big shoes, strange stuff. But don't people go for that stuff all the time? Don't people fall for that con all the time? You dress up really good. Isn't it easier to borrow money? Maybe that's the reason I've never been able to borrow money, But it's funny that the banks fall for it, and the lawyers fall for it, and the smartest people in town get sucked in by these people on a regular basis, don't they? And we had a guy here in town, we mentioned his name on tape, but he took people for hundreds of millions of dollars. He took some of the smartest people in town for tens of millions of dollars, and he just conned them all. So be very careful. When somebody looks too good, Jack Miller used to kid about the kids that dressed up in suits. If they look too good, there's something wrong. You want to make sure that maybe this isn't a real deal. We talked about documents playing a significant role, number 3 there. And these pre-printed documents likely to be accepted as correct. So for heaven's sakes, read any pre-printed document somebody gives you. Make sure it's correct. Printed contracts, leases, closing statements, and letters have more authority than something spoken. So you might say one thing and they may write down something else. I write in all my contracts that oral representations do not affect this. That unless we wrote it down, it doesn't count. I make everybody sign that. So make sure you're very clear about that. Down at the bottom, we talk about finding an alternative authority. Sometimes people will say things that are not true. So the best way to kind of change the direction of the negotiation is to come up with an alternative authority. You might say, well, let me call my CPA and check that out. I don't think that's right. And you get your CPA on the phone, and even if you're not talking to your CPA, you can think you are. And then you can come back and say, well, no, I checked with the CPA. That's not what the tax law says. Now, in my office, I keep a copy of the tenant-landlord law in a binder right on my bookshelf, because occasionally somebody will be quoting the tenant-landlord law to me, and I know it fairly well, but if they're quoting it to me, first of all, if it's a prospective tenant, I get a little bit nervous, because why should they know it that well that they can quote it, okay? And number 2, if it's an attorney, they generally are making it up as they go. They kind of embellish it and put a few extra words in. I say, hold on, tell me what paragraph you're on so I can read along with you, because they'll kind of help their clients along sometimes, trying to intimidate me. Well, if you have the documents, so you have the written authority, and you can bring in a secondary authority like an attorney or an accountant, you can sometimes turn around an argument, because you're not blaming it on them, you're blaming it on somebody else. And then the last thing here, other individuals can be an invisible authority. You run into this all the time when you buy a car, and the car salesman has to go take it and get the approval of his manager, right? Well, you don't have a manager, but you may have a spouse, you may have a lender, you may have a CPA, you may have an attorney. If you're involved in a deal and you want to slow it down, you can say, I'll sign it, but I need to get the approval of, and you say who it is going to be. So you can come back to them, maybe with a reason not to take that particular offer. My spouse won't let me do it. That's a good one. Keeping a commitment on the next page. Do you keep your commitments? You keep your promises? Most people do. Most people find value in this, okay? So once people commit to a position in a negotiation, they tend to stick with it. Okay? Now, they tend to stick with it even more if they write it down. So if somebody says something, if they say they'll take a price, or they say they'll do something in a negotiation, and it's important to you, get it written down. Get them to write it down. Okay? If they'll accept a certain price, if they'll accept certain terms, they'll accept a certain closing date. When we make this list of things, it's not a bad technique to have both of us making a list of things. So I'll give the sellers a yellow pad, and I'll take a yellow pad, and we'll both write together. And then I keep the copy they write out, and I'll give them the copy I write out. We can make copies if you want to. But I like to have a copy in their handwriting of what they've committed to. Because once they make a written commitment, they're much less likely to change their mind than if they just talked about it. And that's what this page goes on in a little bit of detail about. If you just say it, it's not as effective. And people will defend their positions, won't they? I've had a lot of students come through my seminar, and I charge a whopping $595 for my 2-day seminar. And a lot of students have come to the class that have paid $20,000 to take some of my students' seminars. Because I've had a lot of people come through my class over the years, and now they're teaching, and some of them charging literally $20,000 for a 2-day class. Does that seem like a lot of money to you? Oh, yeah. It seems like a lot of money to me. But the interesting thing is, when I asked them, how was the $20,000 seminar? They said, it was terrific. 2 days of just action-packed, great speakers. I mean, how good can 2 days be? right? I mean, if you think about it, I guess it can be pretty darn good, but once somebody spends that kind of money, what do they almost have to do? They have to defend their decision, right? So once somebody stakes out a position in the negotiation, and guys are bad to do this and they try to defend it, they almost have to defend that position. So you want to be careful where you lead people because you don't want them defending the wrong positions. So I write down here a written offer over an oral offer, filling out an application rather than just telling me about yourself and if you're going to rent a house from me. Writing down goals or a to-do list. Written goals are much more effective than things that you just talk about doing. The next big bullet point here, we like being part of the majority, the winning side. Like it or not, we all think we're individuals and we're all individualists and nonconformists. That's probably the whole room, right? But we do like to go along with the crowd. Crowd mentality is pretty interesting. That there's a lot of studies about if there's a group of people walking down the street, like 10 people walking together, and somebody is over here on the side that's sick that needs help, unless the whole group goes over there, the whole group will kind of look at each other and see what each other's doing. But if nobody breaks out of the group, they'll all just keep on walking. Isn't that interesting? And they've done a lot of studies like that. It's not just one time. The point is this. If you're ever hurt alongside of the road and a group of people are walking by, they're not going to stop and help you unless you identify one of them, not by name, but say, hey, you in a blue coat, help me, call the cops, I need help. Now, if you do that and you single out an individual, they'll break out of the herd and they will help you because these people are not uncaring, they're just a part of this group. And because they're part of the group, they just keep on going. And you see people just driving by wrecks. I mean, if there's a whole group of you, you tend to do that thinking the other guy's going to take care of it. Well, we get in this group mentality negotiating sometimes in the way we invest, You hear everybody's flipping, so everybody's flipping, right? And everybody does that. Or everybody's borrowing, or everybody's lending, or everybody's doing something. So be careful to challenge those type of statements so you don't get going in the wrong group, right? You don't be going the wrong way. So that's 36. 37, let's talk about scarcity for a second. And I mentioned this just a second ago, but a scarcity of something makes things appear more valuable than they really are. So if you ever find yourself competing for a product, ask, is it really worth more just because a whole bunch of people want it and it's the last radio on the shelf? Or you want to pay more for this radio, or can you get it cheaper if you just wait a day or two? In a tight rental market, tenants compete for houses, and a prospective tenant may pay more than you're asking. You find tenants bidding against each other for houses sometimes in a really good market, good neighborhood. You find them bidding against each other. Auctions combine both this concept of scarcity and rivalry, where you're bidding against somebody else. And what happens to the prices in auctions sometimes? Do they ever get bid up beyond what something's really worth? You bet. So be careful. I don't buy things at auction. I don't buy things I bought one house at foreclosure auction my entire life. Generally, you're bidding against somebody else. They're pros. They know as much or more than you do. And it's a competition, and the price gets bid up too high. So be careful about that type of process. I don't bid against people when I buy. A house that'll produce $100, $1,000 a month in rent has a certain value, doesn't it? It's worth a certain amount of money. So it doesn't make any difference if they're scarce or not. It's only worth so much. So you have to keep yourself from paying too much for something. People who can't find good deals are just not looking enough. People that think good deals are scarce and hard to find just haven't knocked on enough doors. They just haven't talked to enough people. You think there are a lot of good deals out there right now? I think so. And the real answer is there are always good deals out there. And I know this for a fact because I'm talking to people all the time that are making deals. And it's in every market. People find good deals when everybody is saying you can't buy a good deal now. That's the herd mentality, right? That's the whole group saying, well, we can't buy anything now. But there's still people making great deals in those markets because there's always some seller that'll make a good deal if you can find the right one and make the right offer. Here's one that I have to be careful with, and that's a tenant that's willing to move in right away. If somebody shows up my door and says, boy, we see you've got an empty house, we love your house, we're great people, we want to move in this afternoon, what's the temptation?
No.
Grab those people. Yeah, but the temptation is take them because, hey, here's the only guy I know that wants to move in this afternoon, right? The only tenant. It's kind of scarcity principle at work, but you better check them out because maybe there's a reason they have to move in this afternoon, right? Because they, yeah, it could be. It could be. Strategies for negotiating with difficult negotiators on the next page. Sometimes you get double teamed by, and it can be an agent and an owner. It can be two sellers together, but they'll play good guy, bad guy, like you see on television. Where one guy will be working you, being very nice to you, then the other person says, "Nah, I won't do that." Is that pretty strong technique? It can be. So you want to recognize that because the good guy keeps doing what? Trying to get you to raise your offer, and then the bad guy said, "No, I wouldn't do that." So they work you as a team, and you end up paying too much sometimes. So be sensitive to it and identify it. When you find somebody playing a game and you recognize the game, just expose it. Say, "Look, I'm not sure, but it looks like you and Charlie here are playing good guy, bad guy with me. Every time I say something, Charlie's real nice to me, and then you growl at me, and it kind of goes back and forth." And you expose the technique. And that diffuses the technique, and they can't use that one anymore, and they have to come up with another plan. Overly likable person. I've mentioned this before, but this is very powerful. When you start liking the other party, I don't care if it's a seller or a tenant or a buyer, whoever it is, you start liking them too much, your tendency is to give away some money. So be careful. I mean, we all want to be likable, and we want to be kind of normal likable, right? But if somebody's being too ingratiating to you, coming on too strong, be careful. You're probably about to give away some money. And again, we talked about the next one, a party who starts off the meeting with a gift, anticipating reciprocation. Be careful you don't make any expensive concessions. A party who intimidates your authority or intimidates you. Okay? If somebody is really intimidating, now who can you imagine that can be very intimidating? Anybody you run into in your life that can be very intimidating? Police, IRS, government official. They have a lot of power, right? Now, if you're feeling intimidated by somebody who does have a lot of authority, one thing you can do, I think, is number one, you can say, "Let's slow down here a little bit. I need to start taking notes. I want to make sure I get this right." What will that do? That'll make them careful about what they say. And if you have the ability to record something, and you probably do, maybe even on your phone, say, "I'm going to record this conversation." What will that do? That may change your tone altogether, right? Because somebody may be really coming on strong with you, trying to get you to do something that you don't want to do, and they're out of bounds. They're saying things that they shouldn't say. So if you can record it or can take notes, and you see video cameras in cars catching stuff that's wrong all the time anymore, don't you? So the age of video cameras and phones and they record, these are powerful things. So if somebody's giving you a really hard time, use that technique to kind of slow them down and diffuse it a little bit. People that make take it or leave it offers always entertain me. I had a guy come in one time and he said, I'm a professional buyer. I do this all the time. I only make one offer. That's all I do. I just make one offer, and it's a take it or leave it offer. You either say yes or no. I said, "Okay," and he made me an offer. I said, "No." He said, "Well, you don't understand. That was my final offer." I said, "Yeah, I got it. That's your final offer." He said, "Well," now where did he go from there? The guy wanted to buy the property. He had to go to plan B. So then we sat down and talked for a while. But people are funny when they stake out a position like that. Sometimes they put themselves in a corner. It's like the people that put no soliciting signs up on their door. The reason they do that is because they know they're a sucker for a salesman. And somebody knocks on the door, they'll buy cookies, they'll buy anything. So if you're selling cookies, that's the door to knock on. And Girl Scouts do really well at those doors. We had a guy, the next line here says, "Someone who pretends they're hard of hearing." We bought a house from this guy, and we were sitting at a round table negotiating, and this guy couldn't hear anything we were saying. So everything we said, he said, "Can you repeat that?" And he was hard of hearing. Well, it turned out he really wasn't hard of hearing. He was just pretending to be hard of hearing. But, if somebody's hard of hearing, what do you tend to do? You talk louder, right? Talk more slowly. Kind of use simpler words, and what your mind is thinking that these people are stupid, and you've got it wrong. They're not stupid. They can't hear. They can be very smart. And if you start negotiating against somebody who speaks a different language or claims they can't understand your language or can't hear what you're saying and makes you repeat everything 2 or 3 times, you tend to start bidding against yourself sometimes, you know. They say, you say 8%, and they said, what? And you said, 8%. I said, I can't hear you. What'd you say? He said, 7.5%. Yeah, okay. Yeah. But people are funny. They'll play some games with you. Next one says a teacher. I've got a couple students who are teachers, and when they negotiate, they have to explain how everything works, okay? And when you negotiate with somebody on the other side, let them talk, because if they talk long enough, they will expose so much of their position, you'll know exactly what they're going after, and you can make an offer that'll work. Challenge them when you think they're lying. Don't take it personal, but just ask them, don't make it personal. Make them prove a statement they make that's trying to lead you down the wrong path, typically about value of a property or about what a property will rent for. Said this house will rent for $1,500 a month. Well, you know it's not going to rent for $1,500 a month. Now, you can wire them by making them an offer and say, we'll close as soon as I find a tenant at $1,500 a month, which could be 3 or 4 years from now, but that's not very productive either. You're better off saying, Show me how you know this. And here's somebody who just rented a house right down the street for $1,200 a month, and we know this for a fact. And this house was just inspected, and they found nothing wrong with it. I told you that story already, but that was a recent transaction where a broker represented the house had been inspected, was in good shape, and it was not in good shape, and a lot of stuff showed up. And the final thing on the next page is they pound on the table and said they've never been insulted in their life and walk away. People do stuff like that. I was with my friend Jack Miller here in the attorney's office here in Sarasota one time. We owned some property together, and there was a guy trying to buy it from us, and he was not doing what Jack wanted him to do, so Jack just stood up and walked out of the room, just disappeared. Well, he and I owned it together, and you can't really make a deal with just one of the owners, can you? You need both owners in the room to make a deal. So now the attorney's flustered, the seller's flustered, and I said, I don't think he'll come back. They said, well, please try to get him back. I said, you really want him back? Yeah, so I went out and got him back. He was out in front bringing coffee. Came back in, and we made a deal. But the guys get flustered by that. People get either confused or they get anxious that they're not going to be able to make a deal. And when they get that emotion going, you're more likely to get a concession out of them. And that's why people do things like that. So when somebody tries a stunt like that with you, the best thing to do is either smile at them. I just smile, and sometimes if I'm in a bad mood, I'll say, did that work last time you did it? But if you just sit there and kind of look at them calmly and smile, people beating on the table, people slamming doors, slamming briefcases, what are they normally trying to do? Get you to pay more money. They're asking you to raise your price. I mean, they're trying to make you feel some emotion so you'll make them feel better by giving them something, right? Giving them the price they want, giving them whatever they're stuck on. So they're just trying to get you to do something. So don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. And kind of keep in mind why, that's why we started off today with why are you buying this property? And keep that part in mind, always in mind. Have it written down, have it with you, so you don't go outside your boundaries of how much you want to pay, how much down, how much a month, that kind of thing. Recognizing some nonverbal responses to your offer on the next page. There's a lot of books that have been written on body language and contacts, and most of us don't pay much of attention to it because, when somebody else is talking, generally you're busy trying to form your next statement, your next witty repartee to whatever they just said. And rather than paying attention to the people speaking, you're trying to think about what you're going to say next. So you're not watching them, you're not paying attention to them. Can you believe that? I believe that. If you'll stop talking sometime and stop thinking about what you're going to say next and just watch the people that are talking and just try to see from nonverbal clues how they feel about how this is going, you can learn a lot, because people will lie with their words, but they have a hard time lying with body language. Okay? So if somebody's leaning back and folding their arms, probably they're not into what you're saying, right? They're not coming your way. If they lean forward, okay, and open up their body, there's a much better chance that you're getting through to them, and they want to do some business with you. To you and with you, maybe. So things like eye contact are important. If somebody won't look in the eye, how do you feel about that? Does that make you uncomfortable if somebody won't look you in the eye? So if you wanted to make somebody uncomfortable, what would you do? You wouldn't look them in the eye, would you? If you want to make them feel comfortable, you'd look them in the eye. You'd lean toward them. You'd smile at them. They're just subtle things you do. And I'm not trying to show you, ask you to act. You know, if you try to do this stuff unnaturally, you try to do it on purpose to impress somebody, a lot of times you don't get it quite right and you look kind of funny, you know, and people pick up on that, you know. So the things on this page, eye contact, looking at you, smiling at the right time, not the wrong time. You ever seen somebody that smiles at the wrong time? You know, you know, they're just talking to go, you know. We negotiate with people that we like, so we want to be likable. But kind of keep in mind all we've talked about being likable today, and don't scare people off by being too likable. The next page, the conclusion. When all is well, all is done, people may not remember exactly how much you did, but they will remember how you treated people. So I think the key to long-term success in any business is repeat business. And repeat business comes from treating people well, treating your tenants well, treating people to buy and sell with you well. And you know, we are fortunate because we've had a lot of good experiences with people. We have tenants referring us other tenants on a regular basis. I don't think anybody I've ever bought a house from, and even though I bought houses way below market from people, I don't think there's anybody I've ever bought a house from that wasn't happy with the transaction. They were happy that day to get rid of that house. And that's what some folks don't understand, that there's a point, and you probably can relate to this, there's a point sometimes where you just want to get rid of something. Whatever it is, you just want to get rid of it. Price is not the object that day, just getting rid of it's the object. And when you find somebody who just wants to get rid of something, if you can be in front of them and make the right offer that day, you can buy something way below the market. So I don't want you to leave feeling that somehow you're manipulating people into making you a deal that's going to profit you, because that's really not the case. You're just trying to get in front of the right people at the right point in time, and then make an offer that solves a problem for them and allows you the opportunity to make a nice profit. There's no guaranteed profits on their side, is there? No guarantee of profit. When you buy a house, there's no guarantee you're going to make any money. Even if you buy something below the market, can you lose money? Absolutely. So there's no guarantees on our side. You're taking a risk, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. On the other hand, the people you're dealing with, whether they're buying from you or selling to you, should feel good about the transaction that day. And if they do, we want to document it. So if they change their mind 5 years down the road and forget the transaction, and that happens, we have some evidence that it was a good transaction that day. If you do everything right, you'll find that there's a ton of opportunity out there. Has the time ever been better for buying property? I don't think so. In my entire career, I don't think I've seen a better time to buy property than now, and I've never seen a safer time.
I agree.
Never seen a safer time. So because of those two things, I wish you good luck, Godspeed, and hope that you have a wonderful year. Buy some houses, come back and see us in January, and we'll fine-tune your program a little bit more. So thanks for coming today. You've been a great audience.